Hey guys, how's it going? Jason Sensational here. Welcome back to the channel. Today I will be going over the Riven Fizz Masterclass. This is the deck that I used to climb to Masters this season, and I think it's probably up there for close to one of the strongest decks, at least one that has pretty even match, or one of the better matchup tables across the board. It does very well into the Viego Noxus decks, as well as the Shadow Isles control decks that you might be seeing a lot of. I know you guys are asking for a little bit of a guide to this one, and I think there are some intricacies within piloting it that I think are a little bit different from another similar deck like Aphelios, or another similar deck like more of the Riven Fizz OTK variants. So I want to take this time to really dive deep into each component of the deck, talk about the early game, the mulligan, the game plans, and some tips and tricks, what really makes the deck work, and what makes you as the pilot one step above the rest with piloting this deck. So sit back and enjoy. I am Jay Sensation, and welcome to your masterclass. Before we dive into the deck too much, let's talk about the deck list, and let's talk about what makes it work. So this version of Fizz Riven, at least the version that I prefer and the version that I think is the better version overall, is this version. Now this version is a little bit more Fae package oriented. You'll notice cards like Assistant Librarian, Grandfather Fae, Gleaming Lantern, as well as Rainbow Fish. The alternative side of this is just more of the combo-driven side, maybe like a third Papercraft Dragon. You have like House Spider Conchologist, and you don't really have this Fae support package in there, which I think is a little bit worse because it is just a lot more solely based on the combo, and if you don't draw the combo, then overall the deck comes off as a little bit less consistent. So what this Fae package does is it gives us this very powerful early to mid game strategy that also gives us access to cards like Rainbow Fish, at least in the main deck, so we're not looking for them off of Fae Sprout necessarily. But Rainbow Fish just gives us alternate ways of generating threats onto board. Now, the rest of the deck is still relatively curvy. We still have the Reforge cards, such as Blade Squire, as well as Rune Reaver, and of course, Riven. And I think both the Reforge package as well as the Fae package go together quite well because we're able to utilize the Blade Fragments early on our relatively wide board to try to gain incremental advantages, either allowing us to set up wider swings or offer the opponent worse blocks. And for our spells, we have Fae Sprout. This is more or less just, I think, to set up our combo. So if we need to find a Papercraft Dragon or a Rainbow Fish, this is a good way to sort of fish for it. It's not really necessarily an early card you want to be playing unless, you're looking for a play or you need something to do with your mana on that turn. Alternatively, this is also just a one-drop burst speed spell that I can use for Fizz so that you can fizzle any spells or skills coming at Fizz directly with Fae Sprout. You'll notice that it's one of our very few one-mana spells, especially out of burst/fast speed, and so it is important to save this for when you do need it. Elixir of Wrath, 1 mana +3, absolutely insane for combo turns. Telestone is a one-of, which I actually quite like. It's just very flexible, having the Sharpen Resolve being pretty much our only health boosting spell in the deck, and also it's just 2 spells in 1, which gives you good access to Fizz's ability as well. Might in the deck is one of the reasons why we can beat why Noxus is so good with this package, because this card can trump cards like Quicksand or even like Hush. When you're setting up this like Fizz Papercraft combo and they Hush it, you can still give it Overwhelm again with Might, and that's like a really good way to kill your opponent. Now for the combo side of things, we just have 3 copies of Ruined Reckoner, as well as 2 copies of Papercraft Dragon. Papercraft Dragon almost specifically always goes on Fizz, at least in most matchups in this meta. Sometimes you can get away with giving onto Riven, or maybe like a Hungry Owlcat that you get off of the Grandfather Fae, but most of the time this is going on to Fizz because Fizz can stop any spells or skills targeting it. And then Ruined Reckoner actually gets a little bit more flexibility, because now you can put on like a Rainbow Fish target, you can put on a Fizz Papercraft, you can put on like a buffed up and leveled Riven. This card is a lot more flexible overall, and I think warrants having 3 copies of it because it's just so powerful at setting up incremental points of chip damage that get you closer and closer to the finish line. So that's just a basis of the deck. Let's talk a little bit about the game plans, where things fall in, and how you need to think about the mulligan for this deck. So the game plan follows pretty similarly to how I described it. The early game is very consistent of trying to deal as much chip damage as possible, in which the Fate package does very well in allowing us to go very wide very quickly. Cards like Gleaming Lantern allow us to cheat out our curve very quickly, so we can play out cards like Grandfather Fate and Assistant Librarian for free. Now, this game plan is also supplemented very well with the Reforge cards, having the Blade Fragments, especially the +2 and plus quick attack ones, allow us to just swing in with cards that we normally wouldn't really be wanting to swing into our opponent's board. So say we give a Grandfather Fate a +2 Blade, and now all of a sudden it's a 3/2 that can swing in a lot more easily if our opponent, say, has like a 2/2 Spider on the board, because we can go in with a very wide board and force our opponent to block trade-off units and still be able to push damage through. Same goes for like quick attack. If you put quick attack onto a Runeweaver, all of a sudden it becomes very awkward for the opponent to block into it. Sure, they can like chump block with a 1/1 Spiderling now, but now your Runeweaver is still alive after combat. And that's just why the Blade Fragments I get off the Reforge cards are so prominent within this deck. It's not something you really need to be holding on to go off on like Riven on your combo turn, if you can get early value out of them by just swinging in with a wider board. And of course, all the Blade Fragments synergize very well with Assistant Librarian. Not only does it proc the Fated keyword on the Librarian, but giving Librarian quick attack or Overwhelm also forces out a block from the opponent so that they don't give you a card draw. So this is a very big threat that is supplemented very well by not only the discount off of Gleaming Lantern, but also the Blade Fragments off of the Reforged cards. And the reason why we want to be doing as much chip damage as possible is our combo has a relatively high but limited range. When we have cards like Papercraft Dragon, Ruin Reckoner, and Rainbow Fish, all these cards can be dealing a burst load of damage to the opponent, but you have to understand the range and what cards you have in your hand. If you have cards like Might or Elixir of Wrath, all of a sudden your combo with cards like Elixir or of like Papercraft Dragon go up through the roof. Same with Ruin Reckoner. If you get one of these +3 spells on top of whatever unit you're sending in, this can greatly increase the amount of damage that your combo can deal. But knowing how much damage your combo can deal based on your hand is a very important skill within this deck, and will dictate how much damage you want to be getting in early on. So it would also dictate how aggressive you're trying to be, how aggressive you're trying to swing into the board, and how much each point of damage matters to your current hand. Now, of course, the more damage you deal early on, the less damage you need to deal with your combo, which means the less setup you need and the less mana you need to invest into it, which also allows you to play safer. So there's never any downside to dealing as much chip damage as you can, so long as you're not just randomly trading off units and then losing on tempo later on into the game. Fizz is this sort of exception, not really an exception to it, but just a card that fits both game plans very well. Not only is it the core of your combo, being the best card to go in with any sort of combo piece, whether it be Ruin Reckoner or Papercraft Dragon, just slap a few buffs onto Fizz and then just get 2 attacks through, but it's also just superbly well at dealing chip damage. Again, being an elusive that your opponent can't really target. You can like slap a +2 blade onto Fizz, and all of a sudden you're stealing 4 chip damage that your opponent really doesn't have a good way of stopping. The only issue I would warrant with this sort of idea is because Fizz is a lot more valuable for your combo game plan later on than your early chip damage game plan, it's very important in matchups that have, say, abundance of challenger units or board clear spells that don't require them to target Fizz directly to deal with Fizz. It might be better to hold on to Fizz until you can set up this combo game plan, because it's just a lot better at dealing with that than losing 1 or 2 of your Fizzes early on because they just had a Broadwing, Petricide Broadwing. So that's sort of your game plan. Now let's take this game plan into the mulligans and talk about each different hands against different sort of matchups and what's kind of going through in that aspect. Alright guys, so let's just quickly give some high-level highlights about the mulligan and sort of what cards you're looking for. So obviously in the mulligan phase, we want to set up an early game board state where we can get through a lot of chip damage, which is of course where we want to be drawing into a lot of our early curve. Obviously, things that like Lantern plus like a 2-drop Fae, whether it be Librarian or Grandfather Fae, is just almost an automatic keep as long as you have one copy of each. If you see one copy of each in both your mulligans, or if in your mulligans, definitely keep that. Champions, auto keep, I would keep a copy of Fizz and a copy of Riven, probably not more than one of each. It's less likely that you get value from both of them, and one of them might sit dead in your hand for a bit. So if you find if you ever double draw champions in the mulligan, feel free to kick one back. Generally speaking, I want to hit a 1-drop on turn 1 if I'm attacking on odds. So whether that be Fizz, Yordle Squire, or Blade Squire. Now, there is a slight caveat to this where, generally speaking, I also won't play Fizz on turn 1 with attack token, because I don't want my Fizz to be exposed to too many things in my early turns where I can't protect Fizz the way I want to, or I can't set up combo the turn I want to go in with it. So if you are attacking on 1, make sure you find a Blade Squire or a Yordle Squire if you can in your mulligan. I would still always keep Fizz, but I might be less inclined to play him out on turn 1 so that he isn't vulnerable to any sort of challenger threats or early game removal that I don't have options to protect. What else? Cards that I generally won't keep in the mulligan. Elixir of Wrath won't keep, Phase Sprout won't keep, Hellstones won't keep, Pokestick probably won't keep unless specifically into aggro matchups, and I have an early drop. Might won't keep, Friendship won't keep, Rainbow Fish maybe keep if I have either Lantern or Assistant Librarian into specifically Shadow Owl's control decks. This one is very different in the sense that it's not exactly a combo card, but it's just really good at applying pressure to your opponent and forcing out removal. And a lot of decks can't really block elusive units very easily. Reckoner won't keep, Papercraft Dragon I may keep if I specifically have Fizz in my opening hand and I am against a Shadow Owl's control deck, or just any sort of slower deck where Fizz combo generally beats them. So that's just a general game plan. There are cards where I just won't keep at all, and then it makes your life a lot easier, and then all of a sudden it's just pretty much the only cards you're really considering are your units. You want your champions, you want Lantern plus a Fae, and the rest is sort of just whether or not you have attack token, what the rest of your hand looks like. Alright, so let's start with a mulligan against a Jace Heimer Shadow Owls deck. So now against this matchup, cards I typically want are the Fizz Papercraft combo, so that's typically what's going to end the game for you. However, keeping Papercraft Dragon without, say, the Fizz is a little bit risky because there's really no other target in this matchup they want to put Papercraft Dragon on. If you put onto Riven and it gets answered by Vengeance, that's a lot of mana investment from your side, and they might just use that time to swing back tempo. The Phase Sprouts aren't really any cards I would ever consider keeping. They don't do anything for your core game plan. If you want a Gleaming Lantern or like another Fae card, you just mulligan to look for that instead. So Phase Sprout is definitely just like a last resort card if you really need to curve out into something. But in the early game, you're just looking to develop some of your Phase, and none of these cards really do that. I wouldn't keep Papercraft Dragon without Fizz. If I had Fizz, I might be inclined to keep Papercraft Dragon, so long as I had a 1-drop for attacking on odds. So I think the mulligan here is pretty simple. Just kick everything besides Blade Squire. And our hand is looking phenomenal. Next up, we have a mulligan against the Viego deck. So this is the Viego Noxus deck. We are attacking on odds, which is important to note with cards like Runeweaver. So they are Shadow Owl's deck. They do have Vile Feast. We're not attacking on evens, so the value of Runeweaver as our 2-drop to attack with is a little bit less. It's fine to keep one Runeweaver, but all-inning on like this Reforge thing, especially on Riven against any deck with hard removal, such as Vengeance or Disintegrate, is a little bit risky. And for the same reason, we don't really have anything we want to Rune Reckoner yet. Generally speaking, I probably wouldn't keep Rune Reckoner in any hand anyways. So I'm just going to mull everything besides Riven here. If I was attacking on evens, I might be more inclined to keep Runeweaver just to see if I can sneak the 3 damage through. But since that's not the case, These cards really don't do all that much for me, and without Fizz, especially against another Shadow Isles deck, the Reforge stuff right now doesn't do very much. In a combo sense, it's better off in a go white sense, and this hand doesn't really speak go white to me. So I'm gonna mulligan everything besides Riven here. You keep a Runeweaver. It's just like if you're fine keeping like a slightly okay hand. But Gleaming Lantern plus Librarian with a Riven, it's pretty solid, just a very good core. You know, very flexible options depending on what your opponent does, and it's just very solid hand overall. Next hand into Aphelios Vi. So again, we see cards like Ruin Reckoner and Face Sprout. Those aren't cards I'm inclined to keep, which makes your mulligan a little bit easier. You have two Librarians. Keeping two is definitely overkill, considering even dropping the second one, but I think with even attack tokens, if you can sneak it through and they don't have like a Mystic Shot or a 2-drop blocker, seems okay. If you draw into Lantern, seems okay. This hand actually ended out pretty well. Having the Rainbow Fish with the Librarian is a really good combo against these sort of slightly mid-rangey removal decks. And then we have this matchup against Pantheon. This one maybe surprised me a little bit in the review, but honestly I think it made some okay sense. In the Pantheon matchup, the early chip damage is so much more important because their ability to go wide is a lot less practical. They maybe played 2 units at most by like turn 3-4. And I see the double Lantern plus Riven. Obviously, I want to keep Riven because attacking on odds. It's very good to get the Reforge cards. But this double Lantern as well is just like, should I keep it? That seems quite excessive. But I end up keeping both Lanterns because if you play the first Lantern, the second Lantern costs 1 on the following turn. And you can really use that to go wide really quickly. And of course, the double Lanterns, Rainbow Fish is alright. It forces out Sharp Sights if they have it. Maybe would have kicked this Rainbow Fish in hindsight. But keeping a double Lantern hand against Pantheon is probably not that bad. If you draw Face Sprout, if you draw any 2-drop Fae, you get really rewarded. So for this next part, I'm going to be talking exclusively about the Reforge cards and the blade fragments I get off of them. And I think this is probably one of the biggest and probably most important aspects of this deck that I think can be very easily contrived. Because in other decks that say like the other sort of Riven OTK decks that you might have played in the past, you definitely are a lot more all in on a single turn with your blade fragments. And I think with this deck that is not generally the case. You can use, you should be using your blade fragments a lot more aggressively in the early game whenever you can. Generally speaking, I won't be playing all 3 blade fragments plus the blade in a single turn in most scenarios. Of course, that does depend on the hand, the matchup, and things like that. But with this deck, especially with your Fae Go White package and access to Fae Librarian itself, you can utilize your blade fragments a lot more effectively by sprinkling them out. And what I mean by this is you can use them on your early units in order to develop better attacks into your opponent. So whether that be just playing the Glinting Blade Fragment, the +2/1, onto a 1/2 or onto Fizz to put extra damage, using the Overwhelm Blade Fragment onto your Librarian to either force removal or to just force a card draw through, or using the Quick Attack Fragment on like a 3/1 or like a 2/1 just to make sure that you get a valuable trade, or you incentivize your opponent to not block and push 2 damage through. Because when we want to get to the combo turns, we will need to invest this 3 mana at some point in order to get to the Blade. The Blade we can obviously play out on our turn, but having to invest this 3 mana at some point early on means that, you know, if we use it early or if we use it very aggressively, we don't have that constriction behind us. Or if we, you know, are comboing on a specific turn, we don't need to hold up this 3 mana plus 1 more mana for Blade in order to go in. And I definitely think that in most cases, it's a lot more effective to use them a lot earlier on and a lot more aggressively, and I'll show you what exactly I mean in the following clip. I think this turn really showcases where these blade fragments really come in handy, because not only are they 1 mana spells, but they are also spells that can target your Fated procs, especially onto Librarian. So in this case, I can utilize this Overwhelm Blade Fragment onto my Librarian in a position where my opponent can't stop me from connecting to the Nexus with the Librarian, which guarantees us a card draw. And what actually happens here is forced out of vengeance from my opponent because he just really wants to deny me that card draw. Whether or not the vengeance from his perspective was right or not, that's really not the point. But because we were able to utilize that blade fragment really aggressively there, we were able to force out some response from the opponent. And of course, being a spell, we activate our Fizz ability to give it elusive and also just chip 2 damage through on the side as well. Now, I could have also used this quick attack blade fragment onto the Riven, but there really wasn't too much point attacking into the Hapless Aristocrat there, so there wasn't enough value in my head there. But if the Hapless Aristocrat didn't exist on the board, I could have just jammed the quick attack blade fragment onto the Riven, and then he had to decide if he wanted to block the 3-1 into my Riven or not. This is another really cool example of just utilizing my mana. So sorry this starts at a really awkward spot, but this is on my opponent's attack turn, and before I'm ending to my turn, I am preemptively playing Riven's Hilt here in order to reforge another blade fragment. On my round start, I will reforge my 3rd blade fragment that I need in order to get the 3rd blade fragment in order to level up my Riven, as well as complete the blade. And because I was able to bank that 2 mana coming to last turn, while I did lose out on the +2 buff that I could have gained from the weapon hilt, this actually gave me enough mana to do everything I wanted this turn. If I had waited until this turn to play the Riven's Hilt, I wouldn't have won this game because I wouldn't have the mana to play the Rally and then every single card. You won't see it in this clip. You'll probably see it in a later clip, but just be aware. And you see that I'm spreading out my blade fragments as evenly as I can and in a way that makes sense. I give the Fizz the +2. It can't really be stopped unless they sharp-side it. And if they do sharp-side it, I might get a nice trade off of it because it just has slightly higher attack and can't really be value traded into anything on his board that easily. And then I put the other cards onto the Lantern here because it's the only one that's really getting a good attack through. I can't really attack with too much here, but I am able to convert on this board state in a later moment. This game is a fantastic example of utilizing your blade fragments to the fullest. It's not really needed to go all in on 2 units or on a singular unit, especially like the Riven. I think a lot of people will fall into the trap of just putting all of your blade fragments onto Riven and then just putting blade onto Riven again, or vice versa, putting all 3 blade fragments onto 1 unit, and then putting the blade onto Riven and then calling it a day. But I don't want to play out blade this turn. I don't want to give my opponent action. So if I'm going to open attack, I'm thinking, how am I going to best utilize these blade fragments? And so I can put the +2 onto Fizz. That's where I can pretty much maximize how much damage Fizz is going to deal. Not only that, I just sort of split up his attention and just start setting up these miniature threats. The quick attack onto the 3-1, so that if he wants to block the 3-1, he has to give me a unit, which he chooses not to. So this 3-1 is essentially either pushing 3 damage, forcing a value block, or forcing out a Mystic Shot, which is removal he could be using on, say, Riven, right? And so this is just a best way to spread out our damage, make it really awkward for our opponent to block, and we still have a lot of reactivity here because we didn't activate Riven's ability pre-combat by, like, say, putting Blade on her. We're able to use this Elixir of Wrath and cash in a +6 attack buff off of it. And this is all because, one, we didn't develop the Blade, which would have only gave us a +4, and then maybe give him action to, say, Thermo Beam or Sunhawk or Sunburst, my Riven. And now I'm in a position where I'm in a much more advantaged spot. He's forced out a Mystic Shot already, and we've set up a board state that's very scary for the opponent. Alright, so now let's move on to the combo aspect of the deck, because at the end of the day, this deck is still a combo deck. A majority of the time, I am usually ending the game with some sort of Papercraft plus Might combo or some sort of Fizz plus Rune Wrecker combo. Now, if there's a lot of different targets you can use with the combo, such as Riven, such as any sort of Rainbow Fish unit, just any unit you really have as long as your opponent doesn't have an answer to it. But in most cases, Fizz is the most reliable because you can fizzle and negate any spell that's being targeted at Fizz. So if they try to Vengeance Fizz, you can stop it. If they try to do anything else, like Mystic Shot, things like that, you are able to stop that, which is why Fizz is so good in this deck. So when we're talking about combos, I'm namely specifically talking about Fizz, but there will be moments in the deck where you have to be a little bit more flexible. You don't draw the Fizz, you need to combo off on something else, and you just need to set it up properly so that you have the maximum chance of pulling it off. So in this scenario, let's just talk a little bit about Fizz, and I think one of the most important aspects to understand about this when you're going for something like a combo is understanding how much damage you can output with the combo. And then if you move backwards from there, you need to understand how much chip damage you need to deal in order to end the game. So there's two main quote-unquote combos. The first one is Fizz plus like a Rune Reckoner or any unit plus Rune Reckoner. And then the second one is Fizz plus Papercraft. So the damage range of these varies, although these are just slightly general ranges. The Rune Reckoner combo definitely does slightly less damage because the the Papercraft Dragon also adds its stats onto the board. So the Fizz Rune Reckoner, I could suspect somewhere between 10 and 14 damage. If you have Fizz plus an Elixir of Wrath or a Might, that's 5 damage, and then double that to become 10 damage. You can put a leveled Fizz to 12 damage, or a Spear for 14 damage. You can like double Elixir for even more, but generally speaking, these are relatively conservative ranges that you should expect and try to deal enough chip damage so that you can fall within these ranges. And of course, Papercraft Dragon gets that added bonus because you not only get the double attack, you are compounding the 2 damage it deals twice. So at a base of 4 double attack, that's 8, but then plus 3 onto the base is 7, which is 14. So I don't really think you're ever dealing 12 damage usually, maybe with like a plus 2 Blade Fragment onto Fizz Papercraft. But 12 is definitely very on the low side. I think something between 14 and 18 is a lot more common, especially if you're trying to might or overwhelm through your opponent's blockers. This is definitely the idea that you're looking at. So this can be conjuncted with a lot of cards. You can use the Riven Blade Fragments, you can use the Blade of the Exile, you can use Might, you can use Elixir of Wrath. There's a lot of cards in our deck that enables us this combo in order to push a lot of damage. So let's look at a few examples of where this combo really comes in play, how to execute it, and how to be flexible with the combo. So let's start with the very basis. This is the classic, the standard, the 3 Blade Fragment Riven combo. This is up against a Shadow Owls P&Z deck, the Jace Heimer deck. And we need to keep in mind that our opponent is playing Vengeance and other sort of removal cards, which means that we have we have 2 threats we can create, 2 threats that our opponent has to answer, and it makes sense to sort of split the attention, right? If he Vengeances the Riven this turn, I can just all in on Fizz with this Elixir plus the Ruined Reckoner, and it's lethal. Now, if he doesn't have Vengeance and he had the Piercing Darkness, I have this Sharpen Resolve in response, and I still get to set up my combo here. So now you'll notice that I did tap under the 4 mana I need to play Ruined Reckoner, so my opponent isn't going to die here, right? So I have 16, 18, 21 over 3 if I went all in. Now, I think one important lesson to be learned here is that there's no point going all in because he's not dead, but even if I do go all in, I wouldn't have a fast speed spell for the next turn where I can just kind of slap him with this Fizz because I still have a Rune Reckoner. It makes him hard for him to develop, and I still have a lot of options. It's very important to note that even if you don't kill the opponent in one single turn, you have to be patient about it, because as long as your opponent's down to, like 4, 5, 6 health, that's chump change. You can do that with almost anything, like Fizz, Elixir of Wrath, and just a free attack, right? Like I could even wait until my next turn, but it just so happens that my opponent gives me the opportunity to kill him this turn with Elixir plus Midnight Raid onto the Fizz. And of course, my opponent's tapped out, so he has no more interaction, and so this is completely safe. But it is always important, if you cannot end the game on that turn, just be a little bit more patient and keep your spells so that you have a way to protect Fizz rather than trying to go all in and just barely missing out on it. This is another good example where now I have a wider board I have the 3 blade fragments for Riven. And I think a lot of people gravitate towards this path where they just want to sort of just build tall on Riven and just make her really big and just deal a lot of damage with Riven herself. So now notice that I don't actually have a Rune Reckoner this time and I don't have a Papercraft Dragon. So actually killing him this turn is not really possible. And because my opponent is playing a Targan PNZ deck, I still have to be worrying about cards such as Hush, such as Mystic Shot, such as Get Excited that can stop my combo. Now I do have a sharpened resolve that I can get off the Noxian Spellstones, but I want to put myself in a position that I can be as reactive as possible to what my opponent does. And of course, I can still be very patient here because all I need to be doing is setting myself up in a position where I can easily end the game. I don't need to kill my opponent this turn, but I can at least push as much damage as I can while being as reactive as I can. And you'll see that I purposely spread my blade buffs around. I gave the Fizz the +2, the Runeterra the quick attack, and the Riven the overwhelm. So now my opponent chooses to not block the Runeweaver, so he chucks a Mystic Shot at it, which then lets me play Elixir of Wrath onto Riven to be a little extra more reactive. If my opponent wants to move in with like a Get Excited Mystic Shot on my Riven, then I have the Sharpen Resolve. I just play this face route, not super necessary. I do pick up a Papercraft Dragon, which is really cool, but I just wanted to level up Fizz here so that I do get the Fizz spell, the Chum the Waters, when I strike the Nexus. But right now, I am still crucially holding up a Sharpened Resolve off of the Tellstones. And as you can see, I played it very patiently. I saw a double might. I could have went for the lethal there, but again, I put him down to 5 HP. He's in a spot where he needs to remove the Riven, and the Fizz is still representing lethal to his Nexus for the next swing. Another important aspect of playing a combo deck is always being able to identify options to sort of come back from a seemingly dire spot. So this game is kind of interesting because it's his attack turn and he's about to flip this Pantheon. Now, if he hits something like Challenger and kills my Fizz, then the game is over. But if he like rolls Scout and other things, he still might be able to end the turn on my turn. So I immediately play the Rune Reckoner here in order to add the Midnight Rate into my hand. And what this does is crucially allows me a glimmer of chance to swing back at my opponent. Very luckily, I drew the Might so that I am able to give the Fizz overwhelm, and he happens to roll Spell Shield, Challenge, or Spell Shield, Scout, and Elusive, which definitely means that I will be dying if I don't end this turn. But I do notice this small glimmer of window. He's at 2 mana, he has very few tools to interact with me if I swing back, and I can just chuck this Midnight Raid and this Fizz back at him, because as Overwhelm and Double Attack, I can actually blast through this Pantheon despite it having Elusive, despite it having Barrier, and despite it being just a relative chonker here. And you'll notice this face route. It's a 1 mana spell. I haven't cast it at all this game, and I've saved it to a spot where I can actually use it as a Fizz spell in order to nullify, say, a card like Single Combat or something like that, which crucially could really screw me over if he does have it, which he will have it, spoiler alert. So that's just a sign. If you are heavily invested into this Fizz combo, you need to make sure that you at least have some way of protecting him so long as you can afford it. So you notice here, I'm crashing in for 14. If he blocks the Pantheon, still losing. And his only out here is a Single Combat. But because I still have the face route, I am able to fizzle the Single Combat and my attack will go through. Lastly, for this section, I just want to showcase the ability to remain flexible with the deck. You notice that in my current hand, it's already turn 7. I don't really have anything to actually combo with. I do have a Ruined Reckoner, but there's no Rainbow Fish, there is no Fizz, there's no Riven, and there's no Papercraft Dragon. So I have to create a way out of this game, and I see this Mushroom Ring. For those of you who don't know, Mushroom Ring scales based on the number of phase that are on the board. So slight mistake on my part, I mistake the Yordle Squires for phase. So I initially thought that sorry, 1 second. I thought the Yordles would buff the Mushroom Ring, which is my fault. But on the other flip side, I do run Grandfather Phase in my deck. And out of the 3 options between Lantern, Quick Quill, and this Mushroom Ring, the Mushroom Ring realistically is the only way out of this game. Presuming that, of course, I need to be able to combo them to end the game. I have a Ruined Reckoner. I just need to find some way of getting this Mushroom Ring to a high size and ending the game. And you'll notice that next turn I crucially do draw into a Grandfather Fate. I got an Elixir of Wrath off of the Fate Librarian, and now I'm actually in an interesting spot where if I can give this Mushroom Ring Overwhelm, I have the Friendship for the barrier, I have 2 Fates to pump it up, and then I have the Ruined Reckoner. So I'm going to set up my phase here, and I'm going to be able to buff up my Mushroom Ring at the start of next round. Also really cool here, I preemptively use the Blade Fragment and reforge the Blade this round because I want to open attack to play around Arachnoid Sentry. This is a very critical this is very critical to any player who wants to know how to play around these things. And while I do miss out on 2 attack from the Blade Fragment, I was able to set this up on my turn so that I can open into an attack. Because the Reforge is a grant, I will always retain the effects of the Blade, and that allows me to preemptively set this up so I can move in for an open attack. And then the Ruined Reckoner always plays around any sort of stun, because if they do stun it, I can still start a free attack with it. And now this is putting me in a actually pretty decent spot. If he has a Vengeance here, I do have the Friendship. And all of a sudden, I am setting up a potential out for this game, where initially, if you saw the board previously, there's really no hope of comboing off. And so this just needs to show off some little bit of flexibility and ingenuity in your own game plan and strategy to look for these lines and look for your outs. This tip is pretty obvious. You can notice on turn 2, I have 2 options. I have the Runeweaver and I have the Librarian to play out. Now, of course, if I am able to connect the Librarian, that's a huge deal. But because I have Lantern, I'm able to play out this Librarian for free. And now if I didn't have this 2-drop, I might still even consider passing on turn 2 instead of developing the Librarian. So I can go Lantern into Librarian this turn. And while that might miss out on an attack, if you didn't have a unit, it lets me save 2 mana going into the future. So I can spend on spells like the other Blade Fragment cards, this Might, and things like that. The second tip here is really neat, and this actually comes up more often than not, and this is Fizz Spell. Fizz Spell gives you access to an additional rally, which your deck normally doesn't run, and you can think of this as sort of like a Midnight Raid off of a Ruined Reckoner, or as a Papercraft Dragon. Almost serves a very similar purpose, but it allows you to not only take your mana to redevelop if you need to, or play out extra cards on top of different units. And you'll notice in this case, I was able to set up a rally, redevelop my board, and actually swing into a position that my opponent is forced to block down and trade his entire board. Just make sure that when you are setting this up, you are attacking with a unit that you want to remove from combat. If you try to Fizz Spell on, like, say, Riven here, you're going to miss out on a lot of damage. So make sure you just attack with an additional unit, even if you don't want you're going to get a value trade on it. So like maybe you would attack like this 1/2 and just use this 1/2 as the target for the Fizz Spell. The last tip here is really, if they have it, they have it. You sort of force your opponent to have the cards. and it's just an understanding of your hand state and when you can realistically go in. I see Papercraft Dragon and a Might in hand, and I can just put that onto my Librarian, and that'll draw me 2 cards and push a lot of damage. From my opponent's side, they need 2 cards. They need a Flock plus a Vow Feast, or they need, say, like a Vow Feast plus Disintegrate combo. There's no more Vengeance, so the amount of cards that they could have to stop this is actually a little bit lower. And it's kind of just like weighing the pros and cons. If I go for this line, then what happens if it doesn't go through? Well, I have a second Librarian. I can reattach the Papercraft Dragon down the line in the future, so I'm not really losing out too much. I don't need to commit for the Might if they don't want to, and if they tap under the requisited 3/5 mana, then I have an opening, and they don't actually have it, and this gives me a very nice window to not only push a lot of damage, but also gain a bit of value as well. And this is just really important to note. Don't be afraid to go for these spots, especially if your hand sort of requires you to do it. And that just requires a little bit of understanding about your hand state, the board state, and the position in the game. Alright, so that's going to be the end of your Riven Fizz Masterclass. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know there's a lot of content to go through, so I'll make sure everything is timestamped for you guys. Hope you enjoyed the little montage way in the beginning as well. I don't know what you guys think of it, so if you have any feedback on that, let me know. If you like, if you don't like it, whatever it may be. And of course, for the rest of the content as well, decklists will be down below in the description that I used. I will also put the link to the games that I played to Masters, just like the last 7 or so, in the description. So make sure to check that out if you want to see some actual games of the deck, along with some in-game commentary as well. But I know this is something you guys are looking for, so I put my best effort into it and got it out in a reasonable pace. So please do leave, like, subscribe if you did enjoy the content. And I don't know, we'll see you guys for the next Masterclass, whenever that might be. But thank you guys so much for tuning in today, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow with another video. So peace out, guys, and take care.